He said, "Come upstairs." I didn't know it would change my life. After the divorce, I promised myself I wouldn't fall apart. But promises are easier made than kept when your bank account is empty, your nights are cold, and the silence in your apartment reminds you of everything you lost. I didn't plan on becoming a housekeeper. It felt like failure, like a confirmation of every doubt I'd tried to silence. But bills don't care about pride, and when I saw the job listing, I applied without thinking. The house was nothing like mine. It sat quietly at the end of a long, curved street, in one of those neighborhoods where every lawn looked professionally trimmed, and silence held a kind of dignity. The home was large, pristine, almost too perfect, like a museum of someone's carefully curated grief. I expected someone cold, distant, maybe even cruel. Instead, a man with kind eyes opened the door. His name was Daniel. He looked tired but polite, like someone who hadn't smiled in a while but still remembered how. He showed me the house in quiet tones, stopping occasionally to mention which areas needed more care. "Just downstairs," he said. "No need to worry about the upstairs." At first it felt like any other job. I dusted the untouched piano in the corner, wiped down spotless counters, vacuumed carpets that barely looked walked on. And yet, something about the stillness in that house felt heavy, like it was waiting to exhale. I noticed little things: a half-burned candle by the sink, a woman's scarf hung neatly on a hook by the door, a single coffee mug left beside a closed laptop. I didn't ask questions, but the house told its story anyway. Daniel rarely spoke more than a few words when I arrived, but sometimes I caught him watching me from the other room, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Once I reorganized a messy cupboard just because it bothered me. The next day, I found a small bouquet of daisies on the counter with a note. I noticed. Thank you. It was the first time in months that I felt like I mattered. So I showed up early. I lingered a bit longer than necessary, and slowly the silence between us began to soften. I didn't know it yet, but the moment he asked me, "Would you mind helping me with something upstairs?" everything I thought I understood about this job, about myself, and about second chances would begin to change. And that change started with nothing more than a quiet staircase and a man who hadn't let anyone into that part of his life in years. What followed next wasn't a love story in the usual sense. It was slower, heavier, more human, and somehow more real. I just didn't know it yet. For the next few weeks, the rhythm between Daniel and me settled into something steady, quiet, almost meditative. I would arrive each morning to the sound of the old grandfather clock chiming in the foyer and the faint smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. The tasks were familiar by then: wipe the counters, vacuum the floors, dust the endless surfaces, but the house no longer felt cold. It was slowly, almost imperceptibly, waking up. What changed first were the silences. Before they felt like walls, now they felt like windows open, breathable. Daniel would step into the room sometimes while I was working and offer a comment about the weather, the news, or ask if I needed anything. Sometimes we wouldn't say much at all. But those moments stretched and filled the space between us with something unspoken and steady. One morning, as I was organizing the books on the shelf by the fireplace, he stopped behind me with a mug in hand. "Do you ever reread the same book just to feel something again?" he asked, almost out of nowhere. I looked over my shoulder. "Sometimes. Usually when I miss who I was the first time I read it." He paused, then smiled faintly. "That's exactly it. We didn't elaborate, but from that point on, he'd sometimes leave a book on the kitchen counter with a sticky note, 'You might like this one,' and I always did." He started inviting me to linger after work, not for long, just a cup of tea, or to help sort through something in the study. The upstairs room that had once felt so off-limits became a strange kind of sanctuary for both of us. I'd find myself dusting frames while he rifled through old drawers, sharing stories about his parents, his travels, or the little absurdities of corporate life. It wasn't romantic, at least not overtly. There were no flirtations, no lingering glances I could point to as evidence. But there was warmth and care, and the kind of comfort that only grows in the presence of mutual understanding. Once on a rainy Wednesday, he sat across from me at the kitchen table while I folded linens. "Do you ever feel like the world moved on without you?" he asked. "All the time," I answered. "But I think we're still in it. We just walk a little slower now." He looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether I meant it. Then he nodded. "You're probably right." Another afternoon, I caught him at the piano again. This time he wasn't playing. He just sat there, fingers hovering above the keys, unmoving. Thinking of playing something, I asked, standing in the doorway with a duster still in hand. Just remembering, he said, eyes still on the ivory keys. "Emily used to sing while I played." He turned toward me, his voice barely above a whisper. The house was louder then, full of life. I stepped in slowly, gently setting down the duster. And now, he smiled. Now it's quieter, but not empty. It was in that moment I realized something had changed. Not just in the house, but in me. I had arrived here seeking escape, looking for a job that would pay the bills and help me disappear. Instead, I had found a man quietly grieving a house full of echoes, and somehow a space where I was allowed to exist as more than just someone filling in a gap. Daniel never pried, but he listened. When I told him about my ex-husband, how he'd worn down my confidence year by year with small, cruel words, he didn't respond with pity. He just listened. And when I told him I'd lost friends who didn't know how to sit with someone else's sadness, he said, then they weren't really friends. Simple, kind, undramatic. That was Daniel. The first touch between us was accidental. I was reaching to grab a book from the top shelf of the study, balancing awkwardly on the edge of the desk. I lost my footing, and his hand reached out instinctively to steady me. Just a hand on my waist for a second, firm, warm, then gone. But the look in his eyes afterward, worried, tender, lingering, stayed with me. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Yeah," I said, breathless. "Thanks." Neither of us acknowledged what had happened, but from that day on, the air between us felt more charged. He began leaving little things for me. A scarf on the hook by the back door when the mornings turned cold, a mug of cinnamon tea steeping on the table when I arrived. Once a note under my cleaning supplies that read, "Your kindness doesn't go unnoticed." And then came the Sunday dinner. It was supposed to rain all day, and he texted something he'd never done before. "Daniel, making too much food tonight. Want to stay for dinner?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Me. Sure. Thank you." That evening I sat across from him at the same kitchen table I had once wiped down silently every morning. He poured wine, made roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes. Music played softly in the background, some instrumental jazz that suited the storm outside. We talked for hours, about everything, about nothing, about dreams we'd shelved and places we wanted to go. And when the rain finally stopped and the silence settled in, I reached for my coat, but he reached first. "You don't have to go," he said gently. I hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I haven't been sure about anything in a long time, but I'm sure about this." That night, nothing physical happened. He didn't kiss me. I didn't kiss him. We just sat beside each other on the couch, two people slowly, cautiously letting someone back in. And as the lightning lit up the windows behind us, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the storm. From that night on, our dynamic shifted, quietly, gently. There was no grand declaration, no kiss to seal the change, just a new rhythm, a new way of being. I still arrived in the mornings to clean, still wiped down countertops and swept the hardwood floors, but now there was a mug waiting for me beside the sink. Some mornings it was tea, other days coffee, always exactly how I liked it. He never asked. He had just noticed. And now when I stayed after hours, it was no longer out of obligation. It was invitation. He would ask in his soft-spoken way if I had time for a walk around the garden or to help him sort through another box of keepsakes. He had drawers full of letters from his younger years, photos from college, dusty souvenirs from countries I'd never been to. Each item had a story, and he told them only when he was ready. One evening he pulled out a faded photo of him and a group of friends in their 20s, arms slung over each other's shoulders, Beers in hand, all smiles. "We were loud and reckless," he said, smiling to himself. "That's me." The quiet one still somehow always dragged into everything. Still quiet, I teased gently, sitting beside him on the floor, but maybe not so easily dragged anymore. He glanced at me, then turned serious. "You've changed things in this house. And in me." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled and reached for the next photo. We were becoming something I didn't have a name for. Not lovers. Not friends, at least not in the casual sense. It was intimacy without pressure. Affection without promises. Something both of us were building slowly, cautiously, like people afraid of spooking it if we moved too fast. And I respected that. After everything I'd been through after my divorce, and the years of being talked over, dismissed, ignored, I wasn't in a rush either. I didn't want to fall. I wanted to walk steady and sure toward whatever this might be. Still, the lines between us blurred more with each passing day. There was a moment, a subtle one, that haunts me still. It was late afternoon. I was in the study, organizing the shelves again. Daniel walked in quietly, a folded blanket in his arms. I looked up from the floor and our eyes locked. He didn't say anything, just walked over, knelt beside me, and placed the blanket over my legs without a word. I must have looked confused because he smiled and said, "You always get cold when you sit on the floor too long." That small act, so simple, so deeply thoughtful, moved something inside me I didn't know was still tender. I didn't say thank you. I just reached out and touched his hand. He let me. From then on, our moments were filled with touches that didn't quite ask for more, but lingered a little longer than they needed to. A hand on the back as we passed in the hallway, fingers brushing when we both reached for the same book. A shoulder leaned into a lap blanket shared on chilly evenings. It wasn't a secret. But it wasn't spoken out loud either. Until one afternoon it was. He had just returned from running errands. I was dusting the piano keys. He watched me from the doorway for a long moment before finally saying, "This is starting to feel like more than just you working here." I stopped. The cloth in my hand stilled. "Yeah," I said quietly. "It does." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The light from the window caught the dust motes dancing in the air. "I don't want to make things complicated," he said. "I don't want to ask you for something you're not ready for." I met his eyes. "You're not asking for anything. Neither am I. We're just here, together. That's enough right now." He walked over, sat beside me on the piano bench, and took my hand gently. "I lost someone I thought I'd be with forever," he said. "And for a long time I didn't let myself feel anything for anyone else." I nodded. "I know that kind of grief." He looked at me. "And you? What did you lose?" I didn't expect that question. It wasn't about my marriage, it wasn't about my job, it was about me. Myself, I answered. I lost myself. For years I was someone else's wife, someone else's shadow. I let him define what I was worth, and when it ended, I didn't know who I was without him. Daniel squeezed my hand. "But you found her again." "I'm still looking," I whispered. "Then let's look together." That night we didn't touch beyond holding hands, but it was the most intimate night we'd shared. Days passed. He invited me to join him at a small art exhibit in town. I hadn't been to anything like that in years. I wore a soft navy dress I hadn't put on since before my divorce. As we walked through the gallery, he didn't hover or make a spectacle. He just stood beside me, patient, letting me lead. At one point, we stopped in front of a large painting of an empty room bathed in golden light. "What do you see?" he asked me. "Solitude," I said. "Not loneliness." I shook my head. "No, this room isn't waiting for anyone. It's just existing." He nodded. "Like you." That night he kissed me for the first time. Soft, intentional, no rush. Just the kind of kiss you give someone you see clearly. From there, we explored whatever this was more freely. We held hands openly when walking through the park. He cooked dinner and I brought dessert. We laughed more, sat closer, trusted deeper, but it wasn't perfect. Some days, grief came back like a wave for him. Other days, fear crept in for me, the fear of needing someone again, of losing what I was finally starting to rebuild. And we talked about those things. We didn't pretend they weren't there. We made space for them. That's what made it real. One day, I came to work with tears still drying on my cheeks, a fight with my ex over paperwork. His words still echoing in my mind, cold, calculated, meant to make me feel small. Daniel saw me and didn't ask. He just opened his arms. I walked into them without hesitation. That was the first time he said, "You're safe here." And that was the first time I believed it. The days turned into weeks, and what began in silence and hesitation grew into something that felt like home. Daniel and I weren't the kind of couple that shouted our connection into the world. We weren't trying to impress anyone or label it too soon. We were just there, present, figuring it out together day by day. But I knew things were changing the morning I woke up and found myself reaching for my phone, not to check the time, but to see if he'd messaged me something simple like coffee or the roses bloomed. He had, of course, a blurry photo of a single red bloom outside his kitchen window. Under it, a text, "Reminds me of your dress the day we met." And it hit me, he remembered. Down to the color. I didn't respond with a heart or something poetic. I just sent a photo of my half-eaten toast with the caption, "You owe me breakfast now." That was our language. Gentle sarcasm, simplicity, tenderness, wrapped in humor. That same day, I came to the house not to clean, but to spend the morning with him before his afternoon work meeting. He made pancakes, slightly burned, and I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my plate. We sat on the back porch, feet bare, coffee in hand, the kind of morning I used to think only happened in commercials. Until his phone rang. He looked at the screen and sighed. "It's Caroline." I blinked. "Your sister." He nodded. "She's back in town. Wants to drop by this weekend. She hasn't been here since—" He trailed off, but I knew what he meant. Since Emily. We hadn't spoken her name much. He rarely brought her up outside of the stories in his study or the occasional mention in passing, but I could feel her presence sometimes in the untouched photo albums, the piano, the subtle sadness that still clung to certain parts of the house. "You should have her over," I said gently. "You haven't seen her in so long." "I know," he murmured. But. He looked at me, something heavy in his expression. "I don't know how to explain you. Us." My stomach fluttered, not in a good way, not in a romantic way, in a what are we kind of way. "You don't have to explain me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just your housekeeper, remember?" He flinched. "Don't do that." I shrugged, unsure of why it hurt so much. "That's what she'll see, right? The woman who showed up after everything fell apart. The one who picked up a mop and then somehow ended up at your breakfast table. That's not who you are to me." "Then say it." Silence. The kind that's too thick, too loud. "I care about you," he finally said, "more than I've let myself admit. But I'm scared. Of what it means. Of what people will say. Of what I might lose again." I nodded slowly. "Me too." He reached for my hand. "Then let's not rush to name it. Let's just not run from it either." I agreed. And yet for the rest of that day, something inside me stayed still. Like I was afraid to move forward in case I'd break whatever fragile truth we'd built. Caroline did come that weekend. I stayed away, gave them space. He texted me once during her visit. She asked about the piano. I played, and that somehow said more than a paragraph ever could. Monday came. I returned to the house. I was dusting the study shelves when I noticed the frame on his desk had been changed. The old one of him and Emily had been moved to the mantel. In its place was a candid shot of Murphy, the neighbor's golden retriever, licking my cheek during one of our walks. I'd forgotten he even took that photo. It was the kind of shift no one else would notice, but I did. A small, quiet rearrangement of memory, an unspoken offering of space. I turned and he was there in the doorway. "Coffee?" he asked. "Always." We sat by the window in the study, sipping slowly. He didn't say much, but then again, he didn't need to. His presence had become a kind of language I understood better than any spoken word. Later that week, something happened that changed everything. I got a phone call. My ex-husband, first one in months. His voice on the other end was cold mechanical. "You left a storage unit unpaid. They're going to trash everything if you don't handle it." It was the last box of my old life. Photos, letters, sketches from a time when I believed I'd be an artist. I told him I'd take care of it and hung up. I sat on the kitchen floor that night and cried. Daniel found me there, head between my knees, tears dripping silently. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. He sat beside me back against the fridge and waited. I finally looked at him and whispered, "There's a part of me that still wonders if I'm allowed to be happy, if I deserve to be." He reached for my hand. "You don't need permission. I don't know how to let go." "Then don't let go. Let it live next to your new life, not instead of it." That night, for the first time, I stayed. I didn't intend to. It wasn't planned. But one minute we were sitting on the floor, and the next, we were in the living room wrapped in a blanket, the rain against the windows like a soundtrack to something sacred. He kissed me, and it wasn't careful anymore. It was sure. That kiss was everything we hadn't said. The grief, the loneliness, the hesitant hope. It was a beginning, but also a release. I woke up the next morning in his arms. No fear, no regret, just sunlight filtering through the curtains and the warmth of something finally earned. Daniel cooked breakfast, burnt pancakes again. But this time I ate every bite. It's funny how the biggest shifts in your life don't always announce themselves with fireworks. Sometimes they happen in the stillness, in a quiet house with rain on the windows, in a piano note played after years of silence. In the moment someone sees you not for what you do, but for who you are beneath everything you've survived. I never imagined that taking a job as a housekeeper would lead me to this. I came here because I needed stability, something to keep the lights on and the grief quiet. What I found was Daniel, a man who had loved and lost just like me, a man who wasn't looking for someone to fix him, just someone to sit beside him in the dark until the light returned. We never tried to outrun our pasts. We let them sit with us. We spoke of them, we honored them, and in doing so, we gave each other permission to move forward without pretending we weren't broken, because we were. But we were also healing, together. I still took the new job at the real estate office. It mattered to me to prove that I could rebuild my own life, and Daniel. He supported me every step of the way. There were no ultimatums, no guilt, just support, the kind that wraps around you without asking anything in return. And that's how I knew it was real. Real love isn't loud, it's consistent. It's in the hand that reaches for yours when you're too tired to speak. It's in the dinner waiting on the table when you've had a long day. It's in the quiet knowing that someone is in your corner, even when you don't have all the answers. I don't know what the future holds for us, and that's okay. What I do know is that sometimes the life you thought was ending is just making room for the one you're meant to live. If you've ever felt like you're starting over too late, too broken, or too tired, I'm here to tell you you're not. You're exactly where you need to be. And you never know, healing might be waiting for you in the most unexpected place, even behind a stranger's front door. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of a moment where everything quietly shifted, share it. Drop a comment below. Have you ever found something real when you least expected it? And if you believe in second chances, in slow love, and in starting over, subscribe. Because here we tell stories that remind us all that no matter how hard life gets, the heart always knows its way home. Thanks for being here. We see you.